Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of The Truth About Mental Health. Now today's episode, it's a big one and it's the one that I've been dying to cover for so many reasons. And if I'm being honest, it's been triggered by so many of my clients who've shared their own experiences with group therapy. So let's get into it. Now, we all know what group therapy is, right? On the surface, it's the supportive, healing environment where people can come together to share their experiences and find comfort knowing that they're not alone. And honestly, for a lot of people, it really does tick the right boxes. You think about it, being in a room with others who truly get it, who validate your emotions, who can relate to what you're going through. Now, that in itself is powerful, and that's what a lot of people need at certain points in their life. But here's the thing, and here's my therapist thing. As a therapist, I've worked one-on-one with countless clients who have tried the group therapy and they've ended up walking away with something completely different to what they expected. A whole other experience that they did not expect. Now, of course, while everyone's story is unique, there are some striking similarities in what my clients have told me, which is what prompted today's podcast. Now, starting group therapy usually starts with optimism. You attend your first session and at first it feels good. You feel seen, you feel understood, you feel supported, and there's relief in knowing that you're not alone. But then there's a shift that happens over time. And what I generally tend to find is that the initial relief starts to morph into something just a little bit more complicated. Now, from what clients have told me, they actually start to feel anxious about each session. So when that run up to a session starts, they can feel their anxieties beginning to kick in. They tend to worry about themselves, they worry about others. They worry about the stories that might be shared in the group setting and will that be too traumatic for them? Can they take all of that information in? And some even begin to feel guilty for not contributing enough in the sessions. Now then there's others that just tend to feel pressured to support other members who are struggling. And for many, there's this constant fear that their own struggles will be overlooked because someone else's pain in the group feels bigger than their own pain. So they hide, they don't share. They keep it all in. Then there's the emotional weight of it. People who attend group therapy sessions can begin to start to absorb the struggles of others, carrying their burdens alongside their own burdens. And what started as a safe space just begins to feel heavy. And instead of looking forward to the sessions, they actually start dreading them. Now that's when group therapy can shift from being validation into feeling like an emotional burden. Like somewhere that they don't really find a safe space anymore. Now, this is something that I see a lot of group therapies. If they're not structured well, they can actually turn into what I call an echo chamber. And this is a space where people just keep on reinforcing their struggles rather than moving forward. So let me explain the echo chamber. If you see it in this way, week after week, the same themes come up. There's updates on suffering. There's reaffirmations of how hard things are. And it can actually start to feel like a cycle, that you're stuck in an ongoing soap opera storyline that never really changes. There's never really any movement. Everyone's just validating everybody's pain and hearing everybody's painful stories. And there's people that just come to vent all of the time. And now I have clients that come to see me and in sessions, they'll have just a really good vent. And that's all they need in that moment. And sometimes just feeling heard is important. But if there's no movement towards actual change, that's where things tend to get tricky. So if you take something like social anxiety, for example, someone might join a group thinking, great, there's other people here who feel the same way. They feel the way that I do. And at first it is comforting to know that you're not alone. You're not abnormal. You're not weird because you and your anxiety that you're experiencing, there's other people hearing it and seeing it and feeling it. But if you keep on hearing stories of how they avoid it, their fears and the struggles, without hearing about solutions or progress, it can actually reinforce your own anxiety. And instead of feeling encouraged to take those steps forward, you might even start to believe that progress isn't possible at all because what you see in group therapy is everybody else struggling and no one else seems to be moving forward. So that is the echo chamber effect. And it's something to be really mindful of. If you're thinking about doing group therapies, just be mindful of that group therapy echo chamber. Now, look, I'm not saying that all group therapy is ineffective. That is not the message behind this podcast. There are many structured solution-focused programs that guide people towards real change. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of groups that don't have that structure in place. And it just becomes a space where the echo chamber takes hold. Now, here's another issue with group therapy sessions. It's finding the right group. Now, I know from being a therapist that finding the right therapist for a lot of people is a task in itself. They'll call so many different therapists and try and get a feel for who that therapist is. Is that therapist going to work with me? Are we going to gel and work as a team together? Now, many people get into group therapy because it's been recommended to them by a friend, by a family member. But what if that person recommending it is more focused on their own need for connection rather than whether that group actually really works? And this is how people end up in spaces where struggles are shared, but they're not necessarily resolved. And instead of feeling uplifted, they leave feeling weighed down, stuck. So if you're considering group therapy or you're already in it, it's worth asking yourself, is this helping me or is it just making me feel worse? Do you walk away from every group therapy session feeling just as bad as you did when you went in or even lower than when you went in? Or do you walk out feeling uplifted? Like you've learned something, like you've heard a story that's inspired you from somebody else's progress. Think about it. Now, here's something I've noticed in group settings. People often start using phrases such as my anxiety, my depression, my trauma. Now, of course, the struggles are deeply personal, but this kind of language can actually reinforce the belief that pain is uniquely different and that no one else can possibly understand it. And ironically, that belief can then keep people stuck in trauma, can keep you stuck in depression, keep you stuck in anxiety. Because while we all experience our personal emotions, the universal of anxiety and sadness, grief and fear, they manifest differently in each and every one of us. But at the core, they're human experiences. And sometimes people get so attached to their specific version of a struggle that they resist the solutions that could genuinely help them. Now, I always hear things like, that won't work for my kind of anxiety, or my depression is different. But the reality is that healing follows similar principles. And if someone is too focused on proving that their experience is unique, they might unknowingly be shutting themselves off from the things that could help them to move forward. Now, over time, I've noticed that people in group therapy will tend to fall into two broad categories. You've got those who seek connection. They need the validation. They want support. Now, these kind of individuals, they feel lost. They feel misunderstood. They need a space where they can just talk and feel less alone and receive the support. Now, for them, group therapy can be incredibly valuable, at least in the short term. Then there's those that seek change and growth and solution. Now, these people want progress. They appreciate the help and the support, but ultimately, they're looking for strategies. They're looking for action. They're looking for steps and real movement forward. Now, for those kind of people, group therapy can become frustrating as it feels like that endless cycle of talking without change, almost going around in a loop, doing the same thing every time that they go to group therapy sessions. Now, the key to this is recognizing which group that you fall into and whether the group sessions are actually serving your needs or if they're not. So if you're someone who wants real change, what should you look for? Well, here's my top 5 tips if you're looking to do group therapy. First, you want to recognize the value of connection, but don't get stuck there. Feeling seen and heard is important, but it's a stepping stone. It's not the destination that you're destined to go to. Then secondly, avoid that echo chamber. If you find yourself repeating the same conversations week after week, day after day, without making progress, it might be time to reassess. And then third, seek solution-focused approaches. Therapy shouldn't just be about talking. It should be about doing methods that involve tangible steps. So whether that's CBT, coaching, or structured goal setting, seek those solution-focused approaches as they're the ones that will help you to move forward. Work with people that push you forward. Have other people around you that influence your mindset. They will influence you more than you'll ever realize. So be mindful of whether your environment is encouraging growth or if it's keeping you stuck. And then take responsibility for your own journey. Ultimately, no therapist, no coach, or any group can do the work for you. Healing isn't just about talking, it's about action. Now, I say to my clients that I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to help and guide you onto your own journey for you to take that responsibility for yourself. I almost class myself as a tour guide. I can take you around, but you need to do the hard work and go and take on board everything that I teach you. So my final thoughts for today's podcast. Group therapy can be powerful, but it isn't always the right answer. If you're leaving sessions feeling more frustrated, more anxious, it might be time to ask yourself, is this helping me or is this just familiar? Because honestly, real growth happens when we stop looking for comfort in the same cycles and we start taking those real intentional steps towards change. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you, as always, for listening to the podcast. And remember, if you think that anybody close to you might benefit from this podcast, please do like and share to all of your loved ones, as I really do appreciate the support that you give to the podcast. And my hope is that this podcast reaches as many people that need it. Now, until next time, take care, and I'll see you then.